Tyrone Matthews stared straight ahead, but he wasn't looking at the road. His hands, strong and worn from years of midnight shifts, gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding his mind from unraveling. The dashcam footage was still playing on the cracked screen of the tablet beside him, looping the moment over and over. The punch, the scream, the silence that followed. A black woman, small-framed, late 50s maybe, had just asked a question too calmly, too knowingly, before it all went wrong. She hadn't resisted. She didn't run. She had only whispered something, and that whisper changed everything. "Does he know who I am?" She'd asked, not in defiance, but as if she pitied him, as if she'd already seen this exact moment unfold long ago. 30 seconds later, she was on the pavement, blood from a small gash on her temple tracing the cracks in the sidewalk like it belonged there. But she didn't cry. She just kept looking up, blinking slowly, as if she knew someone else was watching. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. You're not watching a video the news has aired. You're not seeing something they'll ever put on trial transcripts. This clip was pulled from a folder inside a folder inside a folder, buried so deep even internal affairs hadn't touched it. I didn't find it, it found me. And the moment I played it, I swear on my father's grave, my phone lit up with a single text from an unknown number. "Leave it alone. You don't know who her son is." That was the first lie, because now I do. What no one wants to say out loud is that her son didn't just show up to the station the next morning. He didn't walk in with a lawyer or issue a statement to the press. No, General Lawrence Beckett showed up in a plain, black SUV with no plates, wearing a uniform with 3 silver stars so clean they looked like they'd been poured from glass. And when he walked past the front desk, not a single officer stopped him. Even the chief stepped back. Beckett didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. He just handed someone a phone. A minute later, the officer who threw the punch, the one the video shows over and over, was gone. I mean gone. Not suspended, not reassigned. No trace. His apartment cleared out, digital footprint deleted, like he never existed. But that's not the strange part. The strange part is this. 2 hours after the incident, a baby at a nearby daycare reportedly said a name. Just one. Loud, clear, the woman's name. Marlene. Staff said no one there knew her, none of the kids had ever heard of her, but the mother of the child swears that Marlene was the name of her aunt, who died 20 years ago. And that baby hadn't even spoken her own mother's name yet, and that was only the beginning. You ever feel like something's watching you when you hit pause on a video? Like the silence after is heavier than the sound? That's how this feels. Like the second you learn her name, you're part of something old, buried, sealed shut for a reason. You're not supposed to ask who she is, that's the rule. But if you still want to know, then you should probably be ready to hear what the security camera at Precinct 12 picked up, exactly 2 nights later, when no one else was in the building, and her voice came through the intercom again. The crackling intercom sputtered like a dying thing in the empty precinct, the faintest echo of Marlene's voice threading through the static, soft but unmistakable. It wasn't just a sound. It was a pulse, a breath trapped in time, as if the building itself was haunted by the memory of something it couldn't forget, or wouldn't. But when Tyrone rewound the footage to listen again, the voice warped, twisted, fragments slipping in and out like a broken radio broadcast. Sometimes the name was clear, other times distorted, replaced by silence or something worse, a whisper that didn't belong to any language he'd heard before. He blinked, shook his head. Was it fatigue? Was the endless replay starting to play tricks on him? The line between reality and nightmare had begun to blur, folding in on itself like some cruel loop. He wanted to believe this was just a glitch, a technological hiccup fueled by too many long nights, and the slow burn of doubt eating away at his mind. But then the memories started slipping away. Little pieces of his day, his conversations, moments, with people he thought he knew just vanished, and that's when Lisa appeared. She was the kind of person you wouldn't trust if you met her on the street, but if you didn't have her in your corner, you'd be swallowed whole by the dark. She had that knowing look, the kind worn by people who've stared into chaos and come back gasping, but not broken. She reached out to Tyrone in the weeks after the video leaked from his phone, the one he'd never meant to show anyone, and suddenly the story felt less like something he owned and more like a shared secret nobody dared say aloud. Lisa didn't ask questions. She just listened, or so it seemed. Because the more time he spent with her, the more he realized she might be pulling the strings behind the scenes, her gaze flickering between sympathy and something colder. Calculation, maybe? She hinted at things Tyrone didn't want to remember. Late-night phone calls he couldn't recall making. Locations on his phone he swore he hadn't visited. Conversations erased from his mind but recorded on devices he didn't recognize. She talked about the truth behind what no one tells you, about shadows moving in the corners of memory, about how sometimes what you see isn't what's really there. Tyrone started questioning everything. Was the punch real? Had the woman, Marlene, really vanished? Or had his mind conjured her disappearance from a deep well of trauma and exhaustion? Sometimes when he closed his eyes, he could see her face, calm, almost serene, almost like a ghost comforting him from the edges of his sanity. But other times he wasn't sure if he was remembering a real person or a hallucination stitched together from fear and guilt. Lisa's presence both grounded and unmoored him. She whispered about conspiracies buried beneath the surface of law, enforcement, about generals who could erase lives with a call and voices that crossed the veil of time and technology. But then she'd vanish for days, leaving behind cryptic messages that sounded like warnings or riddles. What they don't want you to remember will find you in the silence. Tyrone's sleep grew fragmented, his dreams invaded by echoes of that night, the punch, the whisper, the vanishing. But even waking felt uncertain. Sometimes the sounds around him warped. The hum of traffic became a chorus of distant voices. The laughter of children at the daycare warped into something more sinister, a chant he couldn't understand, but felt in his bones. His memories of the precinct shifted like sand, each retelling changing details, twisting timelines, as if reality itself was dissolving under his feet. He found a second recording, a hidden clip embedded deep within the precinct system, one no one had talked about. It showed the woman, Marlene, walking calmly down a hallway, alone. Then, without warning, she stopped, turned, and stared directly into the camera. Her eyes seemed to glow faintly, unnatural. The clip ended abruptly with a burst of static, but something in the frozen frame lingered, something impossible, as if she wasn't just there, but between places, a thread stretched thin between two worlds. When Tyrone showed the footage to Lisa, she didn't flinch. Instead, she nodded slowly and whispered, "They don't want you to see that. Not because it's evidence, but because it breaks the story wide open." And the story was supposed to have ended with a punch, a missing woman, and a general silence. Instead, it became something else entirely, something darker, something that made Tyrone wonder if the real unsolved mystery wasn't the incident itself, but what happened afterward. What happened to the memories erased, the voices in the static, the fragments of truth hiding behind every blink, every glitch in the footage, every shadow that refused to stay still. He didn't know if he was losing his mind or waking up to a reality no one else was ready to face. But one thing was clear. The moment you hear Marlene's name spoken by a baby who should have no knowledge of her, or see a face vanish after a whisper that no one else heard, you can never unsee the cracks forming in the world around you. And once those cracks open, the silence that follows isn't empty. It's waiting. There was a moment, fleeting but powerful, when Tyrone Matthews believed he had cracked it wide open. The weight pressing on his chest eased just enough to let hope seep in, the kind of hope that twists your gut with its fragile insistence. It came on a late afternoon, when the sun was dimming, slanting long shadows across the floor of a cluttered archive room tucked beneath the precinct, where forgotten files collected dust. Like old ghosts waiting to be disturbed, Lisa had pushed him to keep digging. despite the headaches and the spiraling doubt, promising that the hidden truth was tangled somewhere in the dry reports and erased transcripts no one dared mention aloud. She was right. There it was, buried, beneath layers of bureaucratic silence and carefully redacted lines. An incident report from 1987. The parallels were almost too perfect. A black woman named Marlene, same name, same small frame, same quiet strength, had vanished from the precinct then too. No witnesses, no explanations. The officers who'd been there were dead or silent, and the official story was that she'd left town under mysterious circumstances, never to be seen again. But the truth, if you could call it that, was more sinister. The report hinted at something called the incident, an unexplained disappearance shrouded in bureaucratic euphemisms, and a glaring absence of accountability. Tyrone felt the past reaching across the decades, the air thick with the memory glitch of forgotten screams and silent doors left wide open. The echoes of a trauma everyone had buried so deep they'd convinced themselves it never happened. The idea that history was repeating itself, no, that it had never really stopped, knocked the wind out of him. He traced the faded ink of a name written on the bottom of one of the reports. Detective Harold Gaines. The same man who'd been Tyrone's mentor, the only one who'd ever tried to shield him from the worst of the precinct's undercurrents. Harold had been different, a man who kept his demons close and his loyalty closer. But what if Harold was part of this? What if the very man Tyrone had trusted was tangled in the web of silence stretching back decades? Tyrone's mind raced. He confronted Lisa, breathless and shaking, with the files spread between them like a crime scene. Her eyes darkened. "You're not crazy," she said, voice low and steady. "They lied to you, they lied to everyone. It's always been this way, hidden in plain sight." For the first time, she let slip a flicker of fear beneath her calm. "And someone's been watching us from the very beginning." The room grew colder, though the windows showed the sun still dipping, the last light bleeding out over the city skyline. Tyrone felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing in, the heavy quiet swallowing. His breath, the deeper force Lisa hinted at, wasn't just some shadow lurking in the precinct's basement files or in the ghosts of missing women. It was something that fed on memory itself, something that twisted reality into knots so tight you couldn't tell if what you remembered was true or planted. It was personal, psychological. It wasn't just about what had been done, but what you were made to forget, what they made you question about your own mind. And then, just when he thought the pieces were falling into place, Tyrone's phone buzzed, with a new video. It was unmarked, unnamed, no sender. He watched, stomach tightening, as the footage showed an old home video from decades ago, grainy, shaky, but unmistakably real. A young boy, no older than 6, holding a woman's hand as she whispered something only he could hear. The boy's face twisted in fear, then confusion, then recognition. The woman's lips moved, but the audio was distorted, a low hum that set his teeth on edge. Then the boy disappeared, just like that, like a blink, like a glitch in time. Tyrone's breath caught. The boy was him. Everything unraveled in an instant. The missing woman, the vanished officers, the whispered names, the baby at the daycare. None of it was isolated. None of it was random. It was all connected to a fracture in his own past, a trauma so deeply buried, he'd lost entire stretches of childhood memory, erased by something, or someone, who'd been watching all along. He rewound the entire story playing in his mind. The punch, the vanished woman, the 3-star general's silence, Lisa's warnings, the distorted voices, the old reports. Every frame, every word, every shadow suddenly looked different. There was a hidden layer beneath it all, a truth not just about what happened, but about what he had been made to forget. The realization hit him with a chilling finality. He'd been living inside a puzzle missing its most crucial piece, and that piece was himself. The screen went black, and in the silence, the only sound was the faintest whisper, almost imperceptible. "Did he know who I was? You have to go back. You have to watch it all again, because nothing is what it seemed. You're not crazy, they lied to you." And if you thought you understood this story before, you're about to see why the real mystery has been hiding in plain sight all along. The weight of it all, the fractures in memory, the shadowed corners of the precinct, the whispering void, where truth should live, was no longer Tyrone's burden alone. The moment he realized that the missing pieces of his past, the erased hours, the flickering shadows in footage no one dared air, were not anomalies unique to him but parts of a far wider pattern, a deep and relentless network of silence and watching. The air shifted. It thickened with an unbearable gravity that settled like a sickness in the bones of anyone who dared peel back the layers. He was not alone. There were others, quiet, unseen, and just as fractured. People scattered across cities, towns, lives, lived half in daylight and half in the shadow of something monstrous that no one could name but everyone felt. "You were right all along," the messages whispered. "You just didn't know it yet." It began as a series of cryptic, unsigned emails slipping through Tyrone's inbox with no warning, no sender address, just strings of symbols and numbers that looked like nonsense until he noticed they matched coordinates, timestamps, and fragments of conversations he'd half remembered. The emails carried no explanations, only puzzles, symbols appearing on walls in the background of news footage, flashes of faces in old police records, and faint echoes of names. Marlene again, but also others he couldn't place, all tied together in a web so vast it seemed impossible to unravel. But they weren't random. They were messages, layered in code and hidden beneath the surface of every video, every document, every whispered rumor. And they were meant for him, and anyone watching closely enough to see. Then the dreams started. Not just Tyrone's, but Lisa's too. And a third figure who had been silent until now, someone watching from the edges, observing the chaos with a calm so profound it unsettled everything else. The third perspective came in late one night, through a private message on an obscure forum where fragmented truths gathered like fireflies in the dark. The message was simple, but chilling. "They're watching through your eyes, but you can watch through theirs." A link followed. A found footage from 20 years ago, grainy and unsteady, showing a gathering of faces around a table, discussing the woman who disappeared, and something far darker lurking beneath their formal tones. What the government never released, but someone had leaked, someone who wanted the truth out even if it came in fragments too fractured to piece together fully. In the dreams, the observers saw things no one else did, patterns in the chaos, signals. In the static, the way the name Marlene appeared not just in speech but in visual symbols carved into walls, scribbled in notebooks, woven into the fabric of memories. These symbols formed a language no one taught, a code that bypassed words and lodged directly in the mind, forcing those who saw it to question what was real and what was planted. Identity itself became slippery. Who were they if memories could be erased and rewritten? If time folded in on itself and someone else's gaze shaped what they remembered, or didn't? The lines between self and observer blurred until they vanished entirely, replaced by a terrible awareness that every thought might be a lie, every memory a trap set by a force that had been watching since the beginning, quiet, patient, and utterly indifferent. Tyrone felt the shift deep inside, the part of him that was no longer sure where his mind ended, and the conspiracy began. Lisa, once a guide, became both ally and question mark, her own memories flickering like faulty projections, as if she, too, was struggling against a tide pulling her into something unnameable. The third voice, a woman named Evelyn, though no one could say if that was her real name or a mask, offered clarity and confusion in equal measure. She claimed to be outside, the system, watching from a distance most couldn't reach, yet more deeply entwined than anyone. Her messages were riddles, layered with warnings and strange, urgent advice. "Trust no mirror," she wrote. "Not your face, not your past. What you see is the surface of a deeper current, and it moves with hunger." The dread thickened as Tyrone, Lisa, and the unseen others began to exchange fragments of what they knew, pieces fitting and slipping apart like shards of broken glass in the dark. The more they connected, the more the edges of their reality frayed. The hidden watchers, those silent shapes behind the screens, the voices lost between signals, were not just observing. They were shaping, controlling, rewriting the narrative in ways so subtle they nearly escaped notice. What they didn't say was as loud as the whispered threats. The real power was in the erasure, the forgotten names, the memory glitches that left holes where truth should live. And you, watching this now, feel it too. The way the story is folding. Around you, pulling you deeper into a conspiracy where every fact is shadowed, every identity uncertain. The symbols, the whispers, the found footage, the emails you weren't meant to decode, all part of a web stretching out like a living thing. And once you touch it, it touches back. You aren't just a witness, you're part of the story. Part of the watching, part of the watching. The real question is, how far are you willing to go before you realize that the line between hunter and hunted, observer and observed, memory and control is already dissolved? The screen flickers, the symbols pulse faintly beneath the surface, and the final message lingers just long enough to haunt your thoughts. Look again. Nothing is as it seems. You were never outside. The story doesn't end here, it's only beginning. The moment Tyrone Matthews stood alone in that dimly lit room, faded walls closing in like the pages of a book he had long ago stopped reading, he understood the truth was no longer a matter of what or how. It had always been about why. And the weight of that why pressed down on him harder than any punch, heavier than any loss, colder than the silence that swallowed Marlene's name. It wasn't just a question of uncovering facts or exposing conspiracies. It was about facing the raw, unbearable core of what it meant to be human, the desperate, fragile struggle to hold on to identity when the world tries to unravel it, the desperate yearning for connection in a reality that insists on isolation, the fear that the stories we tell ourselves to survive might be the very chains that keep us trapped. He thought about Marlene, not just as a missing woman or a symbol, but as a person whose life had been stolen by forces too vast and cruel to name. He thought about his own fractured memories, the stolen years, the moments where he'd been both witness and victim to a truth so terrible, it threatened to dissolve him from the inside out. The flickering shadows in his mind weren't just glitches or malfunctions. They were the echoes of a broken system, a living nightmare that fed on erasure, rewriting the script so thoroughly that no one could trust what their eyes saw or their hearts felt. And yet in that suffocating stillness, Tyrone felt something else too, something fragile and incandescent. The painful confession that had been buried beneath layers of fear and doubt. Maybe the worst part wasn't the conspiracy, or the silence, or even the violence. Maybe the worst part was how deeply human all of this was, how the need to forget, to rewrite, to control memory was born from a place of vulnerability and terror, how people break, not just from what they face, but from the unbearable weight of being seen and erased at once. Lisa's voice haunted him in that moment, soft but relentless, a reminder that they had a choice. To surrender to the endless cycles of forgetting and manipulation, or to fight, to hold on to the shards of truth and humanity no matter how jagged and sharp. But even as he grappled with that choice, Tyrone realized that the truth could save him or destroy him. It was not a light to guide, but a mirror reflecting everything he feared, the parts of himself he had never fully faced, the ghosts lurking beneath his skin. The air felt charged, electric with possibility and dread. He was no longer just unraveling, a mystery. He was waking from a dream so deep he hadn't known he was asleep. The faces in the footage, the cryptic messages, the vanishing women, they weren't just fragments of a conspiracy. They were a call to remember, to reclaim the fractured pieces of self and history that had been stolen. But to do so meant risking everything, his sanity, his safety, his very sense of reality. In that crucible of pain and clarity, Tyrone whispered a vow to himself, to hold the story, not as a weapon, but as a lifeline. To seek the light hidden beneath the darkness, even if it meant walking through the shadow alone. And as the first fragile rays of dawn crept through the cracked window, he felt the terrifying truth settle over him like a second skin, that some awakenings are not gentle, and some truths demand a price paid in brokenness. And as you watch this unfold, know that the journey is far from over. The questions linger, the shadows deepen, and the silent watchers remain, waiting in the spaces between memory and forgetting. What comes next is a choice, between surrender and resistance, between the safety of denial and the terror of knowing. So, hold tight to the fragments, watch again, question everything, and listen for the whispers beneath the noise. Because in the end, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.